K98 Talk is expanding its lineup for 2015. This means we are expanding our advertising base. Whether you're a startup trying to push through to the next level or an established business trying to supplement your advertising budget, web-based advertising is a solid investment. Thanks to Talk's newest partnership with TuneIn Radio and instant access to our sister station, K98 FM, we give at a reasonable cost. Interested parties should email us at sales@k98fm.com.
In these uncertain economic times, you've got to do whatever you can to save money. One of our biggest expenses can be our cars, especially when unexpected repair bills hit. Not anymore. If you own a vehicle with less than 130,000 miles, is less than 12 years old, has a warranty about to expire, or even no warranty at all, you could stop paying for car repairs. Roadside assistance, towing, and rental coverage are all included. Don't wait for the next repair. Make one free call right now to see if you qualify. If your vehicle is less than 12 years old, has less than 130,000 miles, even if it's out of warranty, paying for car repairs can become a thing of the past. Call us right now and get your car protected before your next repair bill hits. Get protection and no more repair bills. Call 800-696-1030. Again, 800-696-1030. That's 800-696-1030. 800-696-1030.
Joe had huge problems with the IRS.
I knew it was coming. I hadn't filed taxes since 1990.
All the IRS letters coming in added up to a nightmare.
It got up to like $68,000. My heart started beating fast. It's like, there's no way, man. I mean, I ain't going to be able to do this.
Then they stopped his paycheck.
So that's when I started making phone calls and found U.S. Tax Shield.
U.S. Tax Shield went to work immediately.
They just took the bull by the horns. What blew my mind is he called the IRS right then and there.
So why is U.S. Tax Shield A+ rated with the Better Business Bureau? Joe knows.
They saved me a ridiculous amount of money.
If you owe more than $10,000 to the IRS or state, choose the company Joe chose, U.S. Tax Shield.
It was the best decision I made. U.S. Tax Shield is the way to go. Life is good. Thank you, Lord.
Call 800-471-3287.
U.S. Tax Shield. Boo-rah. Yes.
800-471-3287. 800-471-3287.
Game on, where progressives fear us and rhinos tremble. Welcome to the political jungle. I'm JD.
This is Stacey. No one is safe. No one is spared.
Lock up the children.
And the old folk.
Welcome to the world of liberservative conservatarians.
Waddle-doodle and pass the hand grenades. That's right, baby. Election day. Hope everybody went down to Tithe at Tammany Hall Tuesday, November 3rd, 2015, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. JD and Stacey here for Game On and that K98 Talk. All my political freaks, geeks, and back alley sneaks, you know what to do. Everybody within the sound of my voice, you get over that K98Talk.org right now. Get in that chat room. Say hello to Stacey. Say hello to the finest, nakedest, drunkest, smartest political chat room audience listening in the radio business. Tonight is our very, 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 very special privilege to bring back a great friend of the show. This is going to be his third appearance here with Stacey and myself. We're going to be bringing you Mr. Jay Costa, the Weekly Standard. We're going to be talking about his new Thomas Paine-type tone. What's so bad about cronyism? It is in the
everything.
Oh, yeah, baby. You know that. It's in the Encounter Broadside series. It is number 44. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Actually, did you read the beginning of that? I like the little series, the little everybody listening tonight, when we talk about Jay's new book, What's So Bad About Cronyism, everybody is going to be a Thomas Paine type, Paul Revere. You know, if you're a costume kind of furry, you can dress up and do weird things with your wife, but we're going to go way back in the history machine tonight. Remember, guys, we're not just going to be here, we're not just here live Tuesday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard for Game On. We do it again Thursday nights live, 9 p.m. Sunday mornings, we shift gear 11 a.m. for that Bloody Marys and broadsheets, baby. Your cure for that mainstream media hangover. Tonight is going to be our last night at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next Tuesday, Stacey and I are making a move.
Yay!
Woohoo! 2 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard. And remember, kids, every Friday, 5 p.m. on that WNJC 1360 AM, serving that South Jersey, Philadelphia, Northern Delaware for that 4.2 million listeners. As a matter of fact, we're going to play Jay's interview Friday night on WNJC. Everybody get over to FlipsideShow.com. Find JD's episode number 4. After the show, you know what to do. Not during it. After the show, you get over to Spreaker.com, hashtag JD and Stacey. You find out everything we've been doing here with that Ricky Ticky Tavi Rick Ramos into that K98 talk. Ain't that right, baby?
That's correct. Whether you like it or not.
I absolutely love nights like this. I get all psyched. I get all the bell starts going. I love having smart, brilliant political guests. But before we bring Jay in, there is so much nonsense that keeps going on. NBC had lacked the self-awareness to tweet out Obama's comments about Republican candidates, debates, and Putin. That's right. Oh, boo-boo.
Yeah. From the guy who has never interviewed on Fox.
Nope.
Liking CNBC debate was a little bit of a problem.
Nope. Let me be very clear. I always make Vlad take me out to dinner before I get screwed by him.
Yeah, right. Something like that. Good Lord. Well, but on the good news note.
What's that?
We did have a couple of elections go on today, so we did pick up another Republican governorship in Kentucky.
In Kentucky, right? That makes it 32
Congratulations
now, right?
to Mr. Bevins. Nicely done. Too bad you couldn't have beat McConnell. But
let's give him some story. JD and Stacey love here, baby. I know, right? But we're stuck with Magoo as the Senate Majority Leader. Ugh. Say it with me.
Ugh.
Okay, hold on. Let me reset the audio bubble here.
All right.
Here we are. And then for fans of the show, next Tuesday night when we're on at 9 p.m., I think we're still working out whether we're going to do a kind of debate as we go or whatever it is, but we'll figure it out and we'll let you guys know Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Okay, without further ado, Stacey and I would like to bring back, as a matter of fact, great story about, I don't even know if Jay knows this. Jay was one of our first really big name, like really cool political writer guests. And we grabbed him at CPAC because we were at the end of Radio Row, and his representation at the time, I think it was Javelin, they were great. And somehow the girl started at the wrong end of Radio Row, and she's like, oh, would you like to interview Jay Cost? And we're like, who? And like Jay Cost, like, oh, yeah. And we've had him back when he wrote Republic No More, and now it's great because now we're going to have him up on those 4.2 million listeners, baby, on that Friday. So for those of you who live under a rug and do not know of whom we speak, we are speaking about Mr. Jay Cost. Like I said, he just wrote What's So Bad About Cronyism. Now, cronyism costs the U.S. hundreds of billions of dollars per year and is threatening to transform our republic into an oligarchy in which the rich dominate the middle class. So says Jay Cost, baby, that top political analyst and widely published conservative author. He's going to give you his view here on What's So Bad About Cronyism. Mr. Cost has been a top political analyst for a decade. He is the author of A Republic No More. Stacey and I both love that book. Big Government and the Rise of American Political Corruption. If you don't have it right now, shoot that lock off your wallet, baby. Go buy it. He also has written Spoiled Rotten, A Critical History of the Democratic Party. Currently, you can find him at that Weekly Standard. His work has been featured in Wall Street Journal, Fox News, New York Post. You name it, he's been there. He is a Pittsburgh native who grew up as a Pirates fan, so he wanted to bring him on to his very own special Jay Cost.
We're from the town with the great baseball team. We cheer the Pittsburgh Pirates. Where winning for so long was only a dream. We cheer the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jay Cost. Jay, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, man, we don't want to have anybody else. Obama called us. He wanted to give us 2 hours. We said, Obama, we got Jay Cost, baby.
There you go. And with great bumper music, too, by the way.
Thank you very much. You a sledge? You like that 20-pound sledge, huh?
That's right.
All righty. Okay, so we had Jay on when he had written A Republic No More. And again, if you don't have that book, buy it, buy 2, give 1 as a gift. He has what would you refer to this as, Jay? A tome, a pamphlet, a wake-up call?
I think probably all 3, a tomey, pamphlet that's a wake-up call.
And I love the way.
Well, it looks like the series itself is pretty interesting and trying to be fairly timely in some of the things that it covers. I mean, this is number 44, so they've been at it a while.
They have, yeah. They're supposed to be sort of short essays that basically are a chapter of a book that take on a controversial subject or a topical subject. And the idea is, you put the kids to bed, you pour yourself a glass of wine, or if you're like me, you pour yourself a bourbon, and you can finish it before you yourself go to bed.
Nice, baby. I do that Scotch whiskey, that Macallan.
That's a good way to go. I have no objections to that.
So the way that they actually describe this series, and for those of you, and I'm going to tell you something, folks, I honestly did more thinking in these 50 pages than some of the really longer works that I've read. I mean, it is succinct, it is to the point, it packs a punch. I have more questions written down than from some of the longer books I read. It said, inaugurated in the fall of 2009, Encounter Broadsides are a series of timely pamphlets and ebooks from Encounter Books, using an 18th century sense of public urgency and rhetorical wit. Think the Federalist Papers and common sense. How did you get hooked up with Encounter Broadside, Jack?
Well, A Republic No More was published by Encounter. And the publisher of that of Encounter is Roger Kimball, who writes for the New Criterion, and he and I happen to both have an affinity for James Madison, and so when I submitted A Republic No More to him, I had no idea what the reaction was going to be, but he really liked it, and so a couple months later he came back and said, hey, do you want to do a version of your big book in the broadside format? I said, hey, that'd be great. So here we are.
So cool. All right. What is cronyism and why does it happen, brother?
Well, cronyism is the misuse of public resources for private purposes. So it happens whenever politicians give some kind of government subsidy or benefit or favorable regulation, or even look the other way on a policy issue for the benefit of their friends, sometimes even themselves, future employers, lobbyists, interest groups. Really, any time the public authority is used to benefit some private faction in society is when cronyism happens. And cronies that's just another way of saying friends of politicians. So cronyism is politicians using our tax dollars to help their friends.
Okay, well, and you go through some of the historical references to this and direct patronage, which we don't have anymore. Can you talk about maybe the difference between patronage that we saw early in the country's history and the type of cronyism we see now and what it looks like?
Sure, that's a great question. There's some important similarities. One of the reasons why politicians have cronies, in fact, the main reason they have cronies, is because elections are expensive. In the United States of America, it costs a lot of money to campaign and to win elective office. And you know what? It's cost a lot of money for a long time. It costs a lot more now than it used to, but it always costs a lot of money. And so politicians have to develop these, bases of, cronies, build their electoral resources. And that was where the original patronage system came in. The original patronage system was the political parties, when they won office, they would just take all the government jobs, the post office jobs, the Treasury Department jobs, the land office jobs, just everything, and they would just distribute them to their campaign workers. So it's basically a way to, pay off their cronies with public jobs. We got rid of that, and we replaced it with another system, but it's still the same basic principle where politicians reward their friends with public policy, with government policy, in exchange for help getting re-election most of the time.
And for those of you who are just joining us, we are with the Weekly Standard's own Mr. Jay Koss talking about his new tome, What's So Bad About Cronyism? Stacey's answer is always everything, because she's right. You know what, Jay? The answer that you just gave right there, it made my head shift a gear for a second. The way that the House election cycle is set up every 2 years, and if you look at the current, what it basically takes, like you just said, to stay an incumbent politician. Later on in the book, you actually get into politicians who create and sustain these programs are actually part of the problem. It's not actually the programs themselves. In your mind, is the House 2-year cycle set up right now to almost fail or to guarantee more cronyism than you may see in the Senate, because basically you're elected and you got to go raise that money because you're going to be right up for election again?
Well, I think they reinforce each other. I think you're right that the House, with the constant sort of, the constant need to raise money, which is, really, think about this. You get inaugurated into a new Congress in January. 20 months later, you have to stand for re-election. And in the interim, you have to raise, like $3 million. That is a lot of money. And that's more than $100,000 every month. So we're talking about $3,500 a day, and that's 7 days a week. That's a lot of money to raise. Now, the Senate, you're right, because the Senate has longer cycles. 6 years instead of 2. But the flip side of that is that to be a senator, House member might have to raise like $3 million. Senators now have to raise like $20 million. So it's not like they can really slack off in their fundraising either. Now, if you're the senator of, like, say, Wyoming or Idaho or Mississippi, a small state that doesn't have expensive media, then, yeah, you're pretty well free from that kind of worry. But, on the other hand, if you're a senator from, my home state of Pennsylvania or California, the amount of money you have to raise is just staggering.
Those media, and that's what it is. It's so funny that you said that because, I guess outside of the Cantor race, he was, he had a pretty expensive media market. Those media markets just crush these candidates, and the amount of money that they have to come up with is just staggering. Stacey, no?
Oh, absolutely. And Jay, this might be getting towards the end of the book because you do propose some solutions. But when you look at,
but we don't like rules. We go wherever we want. You go
wherever
you want, whatever you want
because
to,
hey, it just sparked the question in my head. When you take a look at that kind of continual campaigning that the House of Representatives has to do, and the amount of money that amount of time a senator has to collect that pile of money to be able to defeat a challenger or potential primary challenger. Because the focus is always on re-election, both in some of their activities within the political body, as well as, where their focus may be during periods where they might want to be actually working within the political body, are term limits a way to curb some of that, or is that not the solution in your eyes?
Well, I have gone back and forth on term limits, and I reckon at some point I might swing back in the other direction. So if you have me on for another book about corruption, I might give you a different answer. My answer for now, though, is that I'm not a fan of term limits. The reason why it's not to dismiss out of hand your suggestion, because I think there is something to be said for, the fact that there's a constant crush of re-election. Term limits would ameliorate that at least to some degree. But term limits will have costs on the other end. And I think that the costs I think we can really appreciate them when we look at the Obama administration, which has really very superciliously just ignored, or even worse than ignored, thumbed its nose in the face of the Congress. And it really should remind us of, this kind of institutional rivalry that exists between the Congress and the presidency, and how we don't want that Congress to be overtaken by the executive branch. I mean, certainly not to the degree that's happened in the Obama years, and it was certainly not worse. And I think so. That is something to bear in mind when we think about term limits, because if we keep refreshing the legislative branch, yeah, it'll be closer to the people, and maybe won't be as inclined to cronyism. But they're not going to have the experience that is necessary to really smoke out bad behavior in the executive branch in terms of oversight. They're not going to have the kind of experience in crafting legislation, so they're going to lean more heavily on the executive branch in developing laws. And so I worry about, you take away the experience in the legislature, you take away legislative independence, which I think is more and more should be a huge concern that conservatives have.
And for those of you just stepping into that radio, baby, we have Mr. Jay Koss from the Weekly Standard speaking about what's so bad about cronyism. There's I guess a lot of questions pop in my head. My head's a scary place to be. But,
Very.
A lot of people will ask, isn't this just an essential aspect of politics? After all, the wheels need to be greased upon occasion. And you even go into somewhat in the book how conservatives are, I don't want to put words in your mouth, not that they have blinders on, but they're more accepting of a system that has varying outcomes. So long as you go out and you give it your best, some men are going to be wealthier than others and things of that nature. But I want to ask you to put on, and for those of you who don't know Jay's work, he is not just a brilliant political writer, but if you like history, and more importantly, political history, Just read everything the man has everything's a story. He knows the best details about the 124th ballot of the 1826 speaker election. But let me ask you to politically psychoanalyze the average voter for a second. I know this. Stacey knows this. You know it to the point that you wrote a book, putting up an alarm about it. But why is it when – I'll give you a perfect example. There was an election here just now. There were some local officials who I know personally. They've done well in office. And a story broke out. And it was, hey, friends and family had contracts. There was no crime. Why are we serially surprised that this cronyism that's been going on since the founding, since the beginning of man, why are we serially surprised when it happens?
That is a really good question. I think that in a certain respect, I'm not sure that we are. I mean, I think that, I think there is an element of surprise when, like, you hear about a politician and, a particular politician, whoever it may be, that you've known, quote, you don't actually know the guy, but you know him from the media and you've developed an opinion about him, and then all of a sudden this new information comes out and it's bad news. You're like, your first instinct is, I don't want to believe that. I mean, like, for instance,
right.
Michael Jackson, when I was a kid, I was a huge fan of Michael Jackson, and when all that stuff came out about him, and the first thing was like, oh, that can't be true, because it just couldn't, because I knew him, but I didn't know him. So I think there's that impulse about politicians. But I think that if you ask people in general, like, don't ask them about particular politicians, but ask them about politicians in general, they'll give you extremely negative answers. I mean, to the point where, they trust used car salesmen. I mean, that's the old joke now, that, like, used car salesmen used to be the least trustworthy people around. But now, amazingly, now it's politicians who are trusted even less. So I think there's that kind of element as well, where we sort of have this bias towards people that we see in the news, but maybe kind of deep down we know that there's problems and that they're in fact part of the problem. Look, and I'll tell you, I think that partisanship has an influence on this as well, because partisanship, the parties want you to treat this. So I'm from Pittsburgh, and in Pittsburgh we are big time Steelers fans and we hate the Browns. That's how it goes in the Steel City. Or maybe better put, we hate the Cowboys, right? In the Steel City, we hate the Cowboys.
Oh, good.
And the parties want us to be like that. They want us to have a rivalry they want us to have loyalty toward the Steelers and hatred toward the Cowboys, because it helps motivate voters to go out and vote. So I think there's this sort of like kind of view that a lot, particularly people who are politically active, because politically active people tend to be the most partisan people. And so when somebody on your team, quote unquote, is revealed to be corrupt, it's sort of, it's galling. And look, I think that one of the reasons why I wrote this book, and for me, I've been writing about corruption in one way or another for, 4 years now. Mm-hmm. And it was really kind of a personal educational experience where I stopped seeing the battle between the two parties as so much like the Steelers versus the Cowboys. And like that's what they want us to think of them as. And to some degree that's true, and there's no doubt there are ideological differences between the two parties. But the more and more I researched corruption, the less and less I thought I came to view the parties as rivals, but rather as two members of a cartel that have conscientiously coordinated their efforts to limit the scope of political debate, limit consideration of alternatives to the status quo, and ultimately with the purpose of transferring enormous sums of money to well-heeled interest groups that play both sides of the political system, that are on both sides, that do not have, like we might think of the Republicans and Democrats as like the Steelers versus the Cowboys. But I can guarantee you that the medical services industry or the financial services industry or the home builders or the AARP, they do not have that view. That is not how they approach politics. And they are the ones who are extracting all of these benefits while we're the ones who are frustrated by the failure of politics. They're not frustrated. They're very happy. So increasingly, I'm of the opinion that they have the right way to look at the political process, which is a very disheartening way to look at it, but it requires us to reorient ourselves and look beyond the party labels and to see the underlying continuity between the two sides.
I absolutely love it because you're so honest in the writing where you're never actually, you're saying, hey, listen, I don't have the answer. But I love the way you describe it like a cartel. It's like both political parties, the joke's on us, and they're grabbing the American people by the collar, and they're like,
you can act like a man. What's the matter with you?
Very Godfather-esque, huh, Stace?
Well, I would say, I guess, in the last maybe 7.5 years or so, the partisanship and the way that feels is very different. I think if anything, it's gotten more divisive. I don't necessarily remember it being that way when I was younger. Because, I am getting a little older now.
The partisanship or the cronyism?
Well, the cronyism, I think, has gotten significantly worse in the last 7.5 years. Especially when you start looking at things like Obamacare, which, Jay detailed phenomenally well in his book and, comes up again in here with some Medicare and some other things. But even if you look at what the primary conservative gripes are with John Boehner, it all goes back to his relationships with the Chamber of Commerce and some other very powerful organizations and people who funded his campaigns.
That's true, and that goes right to the examples of what you were saying, right, Jack?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I mean, look, I think that conservatives are increasingly becoming aware of that. Like, I don't think 7 or 8 years ago we would be on the three of us would be talking about the Republican Speaker of the House and criticizing his relationship to the Chamber of Commerce. But I think that there is a growing awareness on the conservative side that the and look, I think a lot of it relates to the fact that, up until 1994, the Republicans in Congress had a handy-dandy excuse for why everything in Congress was terrible. It was the Democrats, right? They could blame the Democrats because the Democrats had been in charge of the House of Representatives without sacrificing that majority for 40 years. So it was an easy thing to blame them for. Anything that was wrong in Congress, it was the fault of the Democrats. But in the last 20 years, since 1994, the Republicans have held the House, for 16 of those 20 years. So it gets harder and harder to blame the Democrats, especially in light of if you go back and think about the campaign of 1994, and the premise of that campaign was that you vote the Republican Party into office, you're voting for soup to nuts reform of the way government works. Have we had that? Absolutely not. And we can no longer, so we look at that and we can't blame the Democrats for, we can blame the Democrats for Obamacare because that was entirely their baby. But you can't blame the Democrats for the Farm Bill. You can't blame the Democrats for the highway spending bill. You can't blame the Democrats for all the pork barrel and wasteful spending programs that got inserted into the Cromnibus at the end of last session at the very last minute under the cover of night. That is all on the Republicans. And so I think that there's an increasing awareness among conservatives regarding the disjuncture between what the Republicans say on the campaign trail and what they actually do when they're in Washington.
That's great, and I want to hold that right there. We're going to take a commercial break. Jay Costa is so good, we actually skipped the first commercial break. We're going to pay a couple of bills. Coming back on the other side, we have Jay Costa, the Weekly Standard, talking what's so bad about cronyism. We're going to talk a little bit what I do like about this book, and most of what Jay writes is he just does not hit the other side. Before we go to break, though, we just have to tell Jay that conservative politics is not the Steelers and the Cowboy, baby. It's that.
Oh.
One more time. Who is that?
It's Tuesday. I have to listen to that on Sunday. Stop.
It's okay. JD and Stacey came on K98 Talk. Coming back on the other side. The show's so good. Even Diamond Dave's getting in on the act.
One break coming up.
K98 Talk.
This is Slickery Trigger for Rebel Road Tactical. With proper care and feeding, your pistol will be ready when you need it, there to save your life. Shouldn't your gear be that good? Whether you need a holster for comfortable everyday carry or a tough-as-nails holster for your next training course, Rebel Road Tactical has what you need. Check us out on the web at rebelroadtactical.com.
If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. This is the most transparent administration in history. Not even a smidgen of corruption.
Fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
If you got a business, you didn't build that.
The feeling most people get when they hear Barack Obama's speech, I felt this thrill going up my leg. I mean, I don't have that too often.
Steady.
It's time to hear the truth about America's biggest challenges. Ricky Robinson, host of America Off the Rails, will tackle the important issues facing America today as he tries to keep America from coming off the track. Get ready to hear the truth every Monday through Friday starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central, here on K98Talk.com and the Spark Radio Network.
Welcome to the face. Welcome to the face of the new democracy.
Are you conservative in a world of liberal?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're not alone. Hey, I'm Daniel Stafford, host of the Stafford Voice, and I'd like to invite you to tune in each Monday, 10 p.m. Eastern, where I'll break down the events of the week, and together we'll learn about how they affect you. So, sit back and get ready for the good, the bad, and the ugly of talk radio right here on K98 Talk.
From the Vikings of Norway to my home down south to Washington, D.C., I've been around. I've seen it all, and I've come out on top. You better beware, for all you know, the bell tolls for you. Enter the bell tower or watch your step. 8 p.m. Thursdays, K98 Talk.
Welcome back to all our political freaks, geeks, and back alley sneaks. JD and Stacey here on Game On that K98 Talk. Everybody in the sound of my voice, you know what to do. Get over to K98Talk.org right now. Get in that chat room. Say hello to Stacey. Take your clothes off with everybody else. We let the guests keep their clothes on. Only the radio audience is drunk and naked. Jay Koss going to keep them clothes on. Remember, guys, we're not just here live Tuesday nights, 10 p.m. for Game On. We do it again Thursday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sunday, Shift Gears, 11 a.m. Bloody Marys and Broadsheets. Starting next Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Stacey and I are going to be moving from that 10 o'clock spot every Friday, 5 p.m. That drive time, that WNJC, 1360 a.m., serving that Southern Jersey, Philadelphia, and Northern Delaware for that 4.2 million listeners. Going to be putting that Jay Cost interview back out over there. Find JD on the Flip Side Show with that Michael Loftus. As always, get over to Spreaker.com. Hashtag JD and Stacey. After the show, kids. After the show, after, not during. And your hashtag JD and Stacey, you find out everything we've been doing here with that Ricky Ticky Tavi Rick Robinson. Want to bring back in and welcome Jay Koss from the Weekly Standard. We've been talking about what's so bad about cronyism. And, you know, Jay, if I'm not mistaken, did you say when we interviewed you for Republic No More that the impetus and the inspiration for you writing that book was Obamacare?
Yeah, that's right. That was also the sort of inspiration for Spoiled Rotten as well, which was my first book that sort of looked at corruption within the Democratic Party, and it kind of started me on this course. But yeah, Obamacare was outrageous to me. You know, and not for the reasons that most conservatives were outraged, although those outraged me as well. I was just really watching the way that they cut deals with interest group after interest group after interest group. Just struck me as being wrong and offensive and contrary to our founding principles. And it really sort of got me kind of looking more closely at public policy. Since I was from, 7-8 years prior when I first got started in politics, I'd been primarily a campaigns and election guy, kind of took policy for granted. I was just a conservative by disposition, and then broadly ideologically speaking, I was just conservative in my bones. But I hadn't really looked at, say, tax policy or, regulatory policy. Obamacare was the first time I really watched the policy-making process happen, and I was just horrified. And that was what kind of got me on this on this track that I'm on now.
And I'm glad you said that, because the reason that I brought that up, your intellectual honesty comes through, because what I'd like you to take a little bit of detail on is if you could explain to the audience, because we cannot get caught up in an echo chamber and think that we're holier than thou when we're not. I thought what you said about the conservatives and Republicans' instincts in Congress to move away from government subsidies prevailed, and within a few years later, was it 2014, you thought was just one of the most wasteful farm bills ever written, correct?
Oh, it was terrible. And this, by the way, was after they had passed a fairly good Farm Reform Act in 1996, the FAIR Act, which is also known as the Freedom to Farm Act. Was basically the point of that was to try and wean the farmers off of farm subsidies. But there were a couple bad crop yields, and profit margins in the agribusinesses started to decline in the late 90s, and they lobbied Republicans to give back the subsidies. And by the way, that also something happened with Medicare as well. The Balanced Budget Act of 1997 had all these reforms and cuts in Medicare. Mm-hmm. They weren't really well designed, but they were at least an effort to bring fiscal, sanity to a program that is just literally insane. But in the late 90s, the hospitals' margins started to decline, and the hospitals started to get more aggressive and asking for walkbacks, and they got them. And then, when they passed the prescription drug bill, they needed the hospitals and the doctors on board, and the price of admission for them was more walkbacks. And the next thing you know, every year they're passing that reprehensible doc fix to basically patch the 1997 Balanced Budget Act. That's all on the Republicans, by the way. Those were Republican-inspired bills. It was the Republicans who gave up on those reforms. And even if you say, the reforms didn't work. Okay, fine, the reforms didn't work. But, they never tried reforming it again to try and save the money. They just gave up and gave the money back.
Well, and it's not just the farmers that get upset about the ag bill, or just the hospitals that get upset about Medicare. Be nice to the
farmers,
reform.
They listen. Be nice to the farmers, they listen.
Well, no. You're the one who decided nobody from Iowa should listen to us anymore.
Oh, I know. Me and Liz Mayer pissed off everybody in Iowa. I'm sorry. Go eat some corn and listen to something else.
Anyway, because I worked for ag manufacturers, and boy, they watch those farm subsidy bills, and the crop, the chemical manufacturers, the seed producers, everybody involved in the agribusiness watches it. So it's not just a single lobby or, one set of very defined people. Same in the medical. I was in the medical field for a while. It's medical equipment manufacturers and all the associated services that depend on the medical profession for their own income or their own profit margins. So those groups of constituencies just become bigger and bigger and bigger.
That is such a good point. As actually, I think the key point to understanding how interest group politics in the United States work is that, we can talk about individual interest groups, but real interest group power, the ability to move public policy, depends upon the networks of interest groups and phalanx of interest groups, if you will. And so you mentioned, the Farm Bill in particular. One of the reasons why the Farm Bill on an economic level really makes precious little sense. It is just a tangle of payoffs that have no internal logic. We give incentives to encourage farmers to farm less. And then at the same time, we offer them crop insurance, which effectively incentivizes them to farm more. I mean, there's all sorts of things like it's internally contradictory things in the Farm Bill. The reason the Farm Bill survives, despite this internal contradiction, is because it ensnares so many different groups. The Farm Bill itself has grown larger and larger and larger. I'm not talking about in the total expenditures. I'm talking about the policy domains and the different interest groups that those policy domains end up ensnaring. And so that what you get in the end is a policy that as a whole makes absolutely no sense, but is nevertheless undefeatable. It cannot be stopped because there are so many interest groups that take just one little morsel for themselves and will therefore support it, and you add all of them up and you can't get past them.
And the money that they spend on those morsels is phenomenal. I mean, you go in there about the financial service industry, and I forget if it's the healthcare that's second behind that. When you're talking about basically you're talking about, with cronyism, one of the things I took away from it is that lobbying capital becomes a force multiplier because you go into the fact that they could not see these kinds of returns in the marketplace. When you can take $1 billion or $100 million or $50 million or what have you, and you can buy this interest, what that opens up for you, because like you said, a lot of the costs of cronyism aren't even calculated. They're off balance sheet. Whether it's a tax abatement or something like that, I mean, the money that's spent on what's referred to as morsels, is it that collection of money on all those morsels as the whole that has people, as you say near the end of the book, conservatives willing to write off the GOP because they're right up in their problems with the congressional committees and the XIM Bank and everything else?
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's such a good point, too, by the way, talking about the off-budget nature of cronyism. I think that, and you see that, by the way, with the propaganda that comes out from the Export-Import Bank, where they say, oh, well, we don't cost the government anything. Well, that's not exactly true. The fact of the matter is that the government is underwriting those loans, and if those loans go bad, then we're going to be out quite a pretty penny. And, oh, by the way, the XM Bank had a bunch of loans that went bad in the mid-'80s. But beyond that, I mean, so even that, so that right there, that's off book, but that's still a cost. That's still a cost that we have to bear. We have to bear the chance the loans go bad, especially, and which is a non-zero cost because they've gone bad before. But beyond that, so that's one way the effect of cronyism is off budget. But then beyond that, the effects of government intervention in the economy, the sort of version of like 18th century mercantilism that we're still like obsessed with practicing in this country. Like you would think by this point Adam Smith would have won, but no, he hasn't won. Because we don't actually believe in the free market in this country.
No.
We believe in tinkering. We believe in pulling a lever here, and we entirely overlook the fact that when we pull a lever on one side, it has an effect somewhere else that's completely surprising, and we have no idea whether the net effect is positive. The Export-Import Bank is a great example of that, right? So the Export-Import Bank, Boeing loves the Export-Import Bank because the Export-Import Bank finances all of these loans for overseas carriers. Delta hates the Export-Import Bank because Delta is in competition with those overseas carriers, and those carriers are getting subsidized federal government loans to compete with Delta. So you tell me, in net, are we any better off? We're helping Boeing but hurting Delta? That doesn't make any sense. And that is the problem a lot of times with cronyism, is that on the merits, you look at an institution like the Export-Import Bank, and you say, this bank doesn't make any sense. This agency has to go. That's not to say that we should support government. Government can't support exports in theory. I personally am opposed to it. But, look, if we're going to redesign things from the ground up, maybe we would want to rebuild, and rebuild it in a way that subsidizes or helps exporters. Okay, that's a worthwhile government endeavor. The fact of the matter is that the way we actually do it is terrible, and we should get rid of it. But we can't get rid of it because all of these interest groups draw benefit from it, and they lobby to keep it. And that is sort of one of the lessons that you sort of develop when you look at cronyism, is that a lot of times when these policies start, they make sense. But then it turns out, we miscalculated, or society has changed, or something's different, and now the policy's outdated, and we can't get rid of it. The Farm Bill is an excellent example of that. The Farm Bill was started in the 1930s when the farmers, it was like grapes of wrath in the Midwest. That's how bad it was. Mm-hmm. And we needed to do something for the farmers because the farmers were just desperate. So we started a farm subsidy program. Well, now farmers make more money per capita. The average farmer makes more money than the average non-farmer. So what are we still doing with so much money wrapped up in farm subsidies? Well, it doesn't make any economic sense anymore. As a matter of fact, economists will tell you that economists will tell you that farmers, the economics of farming have now become so advanced that farmers can anticipate where the market is going, and they can adjust their outputs in such a way that they don't need subsidies the way they used to. So why do we still have this? It doesn't make any sense on an economic level. From a national interest, public good kind of perspective, it doesn't make any sense. Well, we have it because all of these interest groups want it.
Well, and Jay, towards the end of the pamphlet here, you start talking about the Republican Party and how the best hope for conservatives who are really looking to reduce the size and scope of government through a reduction in some of these programs is with the Republican Party. Can you talk a little bit about some of the specific ideas you have to reduce, I guess, what you would call the incentive for these elected officials to participate in cronyism?
Right. That's a good question. The problem when the impulse I think that conservatives have when they look at these policies, they blame the policies and say, oh, well, we got to reform the policies. And you think about all of the effort that went into trying to kill the Export-Import Bank, and it's still not even dead yet. I mean, it's like the Walking Dead over there. The thing keeps coming back to life. We can't kill it. All this work to kill, and it's just a tiny, insignificant program in the grand scheme of things. It's hardly the biggest piece of the pie. Let's put it that way. And yet we can't seem to get rid of it. And even to the extent that we have been successful, it's taken enormous effort. So that tells me that, I think we need to start looking beyond the policies. That if we try a frontal assault on these policies, we're not going to succeed.
What a great...
We have to look behind the policies, and in particular at the politicians who underwrite the policies year after year after year. And we have to ask ourselves, why are they doing that? Why do they continue to be so responsive to interest group pressure rather than the demands of, the general welfare? Why are they so concerned about what their donors are saying? And I think that's the answer, is that they need this money. So for me, what conservatives need to do is ironically enough, is to take a page out of Ralph Nader's playbook and start looking at campaign finance, because campaign finance is at the root of the problem. Because these politicians need so much money to win re-election, it makes them amenable to the kinds of policies that we've been discussing. Because the Farm Bill, the federal funding of housing, the waste and fraud and abuse in Medicare, all of these things that they don't do anything about they don't do anything about them because they get so much campaign money from the interest groups that have a personal stake in these programs. And that's what we have to dislodge.
It's so funny, Jay, when you were talking about Delta and XIM, it was, to my mind, it's one of those political equivalents of when size matters, because in my mind, I think that, Delta as a large multinational corporation, there's a lot of cronyism inherent in being a business that large, and you generally get your way. Then you turn around as Delta, and all of a sudden you can't believe it. You're actually out-cronied by size, because being that you're a global multinational and can usually get what you want through your cronyism, now you're being out-crony-sized by the fact that it's the XIM Bank and sovereign states and the federal government. And to Stacey's point about fixes, on page 29, you say, but in other instances, this means common sense fixes are never even mentioned, let alone considered. You go into a little bit about the semi-sovereign people by political scientist E.E. Schatzschneider. And I wish, would you go into a little bit about the mobilization of bias, and is anywhere in there can some of these solutions be found? Or in understanding that, can that help us better find some of these solutions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The way to think about the mobilization of bias is thinking about it as the committee chairman. Okay, everybody on the committee gets a vote, but the chairman decides what we vote on. So the mobilization of bias is an effort behind the scenes to determine what we're actually going to debate. And so I use that in the section that you mentioned in the book. I use that in reference to Medicare, because there is an enormous ideological debate about Medicare in this country. It's the Ryan plan versus, single payer, which is the status quo. That's the debate. And it has dominated pretty much every political discussion for the last 30 years has had at least something to do with, Medicare along those lines. Should we privatize it or should we leave it as it is? Right? What is never discussed is the fact that leaving it as it is, or not privatizing, or privatizing it, regardless of whichever way you go, there's the government estimates that there is $30 billion in Medicare claims paid out every year incorrectly. That is to say that some doctor or some, claimant somewhere filed a claim that they shouldn't have filed and they got paid. And so $30 billion, think about that. That is an enormous sum of money. So why, for goodness sake, why does the government not try to get it back? And believe me, they do not try to get it back. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services distributes about as much money as all but, say, like 15 of the wealthiest nations on earth. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars every year that pass through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They have a staff, I think, of about 5,000 people. They simply, and by the way, it's Medicare and Medicaid services, so a big chunk of that 5,000 is actually dedicated to Medicaid. So why don't we have if we're spending all of this money, why aren't we auditing it? Well, we're not auditing it because the medical services industry lobbies Congress so that Congress does not create the capacity to audit it. So every year, CMS releases a report saying how much money we lost in improper Medicare claims, but we do nothing about it. And this is where we get into the mobilization of bias. You never hear about this story because neither political party wants to audit Medicare. Neither of them do, because both of them receive massive infusions of cash from the medical services industry. And as large as $30 billion a year sounds, it's actually an underestimate of the total amount of money that's wasted. Because, you know, when you pay out a Medicare claim, there's a formula somewhere along the line that determines how much should be paid out. Well, the medical services industry writes something like 90% of the formulas because CMS, since it has such a tiny staff, doesn't have the institutional capacity to actually figure out how much these procedures you should pay them out on. So they let the doctors and the hospitals and the medical service providers in general, they let them write their own reimbursement rates, which is an enormous conflict of interest. It probably increases the amount of waste every year in Medicare by a significant amount. And yet none of this is ever discussed. When the two parties talk about Medicare, it's always in the context of privatization versus more of the same. There's never any discussion about taking a serious look at whether or not Medicare, that CMS is actually spending this money responsibly. That is what cronyism on that level. When we're talking about cronyism on that level, we're not talking about, a job at some shipyard or some port. We're not talking about a post office job, position somewhere. We're talking about billions of dollars every year that are passing from the medical service lobby to Congress. And that's what it buys. It buys bipartisan silence.
Literally have Jay left for 2 minutes. We've just had for the last hour Jay Cost from the Weekly Standard talking his new book, What's So Bad About Cronyism. It is in the Encounter Broadside series. It is number 44. Jay, we literally have you for about 1 minute 30, 2 minutes left. Where can the peoples go and buy What's So Bad About Cronyism? And then where can they double down and get a Republic No More for friends and family for gifts for Christmas?
Well, I really appreciate that question. That's my favorite question. It's available at probably one of the online booksellers would probably be your best bet for a Republic No More. It's been out for about 7-8 months now, so you can get it new at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and probably the same deal for What's So Bad About Cronyism. I doubt you'd find those at your bookstore. They tend not to sell the broadsides at bookstores, but it's available online, and it's only, I think it's like $3.99 for a Kindle version, $5.99 for a print version, so it's not too bad.
You go read him over at the Weekly Standard. You do that all the time. You find the catalog of his work. If you're on the Twitters, you go over to that at JayCosttws. You show him some love. You see some smart stuff. Stacey, we got him for about 1 minute and 10 seconds. Get some political news out of him. Ask him a question. Hurry up.
I just want to say at the very end, Jay, you say which is the most important type of election for conservatives to be concerned with?
Congressional elections.
At what stage? The primary?
The primaries. I think
primaries.
If you're in a conservative district that's overwhelmingly Republican, and you don't have a member of Congress who is an avowed opponent of cronyism, primary the guy. Because whoever wins the primary is guaranteed to win the general election. Primaries are our main point of entrance into reforming the Republican Party. We didn't really have a chance to talk about this, but I think the only way to move forward on this is we have to reform the Republican Party before the Republican Party can reform the government, and our only opportunity to do that is through the primary system, and we should focus on these the safely Republican districts. The members from those districts that aren't pulling their weight for the conservative movement, we should yank them.
And the best part about not talking
Johnny
about
Isaacson, now.
And the best part about not talking on that on tonight's show is going to be a reason to have you back. Jay, we cannot thank you enough. This is your third visit to the program. I hope you would consider continuing to come back. Ourselves and our audience absolutely love having you as a guest.
Oh, thanks, JD. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it. Great questions.
Jay, thanks a lot, brother. You have a good one, man. We'll see you on the Twitters.
All right.
Jay Cost, ladies and gentlemen. Stacey, it is unfair that we get to do this, is it not?
It's totally unfair.
This is so cool. This is so cool. I hope
we get
everybody
to go to things like CPAC and meet awesome people like Jay and Charles C.W. Cook and a whole host of others, and then they actually come and talk to us for a while. It's
we want to thank Ricky Tiki Tavi, Rick Robinson, K98 Talk, and also WNJC 1360 AM Southern Jersey, Philadelphia, Northern Delaware. We'll be playing Jay's interview this coming Friday at 5 p.m. Baby girl, you got them keys?
Oh, I got them keys today.
Get out of here. Tell the nice people where they can find you.
You can always find me on the Twitters at ScottsFire, SCOTSFYRE, and on Facebook at Stacey Lennox. Wow.
And you can find me at Game On JD on the Twitters. Give J Cost TWS a follow as well. And of course, kids, you know that I am on alleyways, barstools, shady situations, the occasional donkey show, places I shouldn't be, and I don't have my shots. If I live through it, I'll see you Thursday.
I'm looking for you, you Occupy freaks with your glitter bombs. Bring it on! Bring on the glitter. Everything has changed. Everything has changed in the last few years. Conservatives used to take it, and we're not taking it anymore.
When our water heater broke down last month, it was a nightmare. It took 5 hours for the plumber to show up, and he charged us a couple of $100 just to come out. Then it cost another $1,800 to put in the new water heater. By the time it was all said and done, I felt like I'd been taken. But what else could I do?
The smartest thing you can do is get a home warranty from American Residential Warranty. Their home warranties pay to repair or replace all your major appliances when they break, and they will break, and at the worst possible time. Call American Residential Warranty right now for free information on home warranties starting at just pennies a day. Don't wait for your refrigerator to stop running or your ceiling fans to stop turning. Call American Residential Warranty right now. Ask how you can save up to 50% on washer and dryer coverage. Just call 1-800-513-6154. That's 1-800-513-6154. Again, 1-800-513-6154. Call now.
Tired of paying outrageous prices for Viagra? Well, we have great news for you. Now you can finally get Viagra at huge discounts. Healthy Man allows you to save up to $500 on Viagra. Why pay U.S. pharmacy prices of $15 per pill or more when you can get Viagra for less than $3 a pill? Call today and get 40 Viagra pills for only $99. This can cost as much as $600 at your local pharmacy. You can't afford not to call us. If you want Viagra at the lowest prices, never pay $15 a pill pharmacy prices again. Get Viagra for less than $3 a pill. Call 1-800-516-7602 today and save up to $500 and get 40 pills for just $99. Healthy Man is fast, easy, and affordable. Operators are waiting at 1-800-516-7602 to take your call right now. Call 1-800-516-7602. That's 1-800-516-7602. Again, 1-800-516-7602.
Giggity, 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 let's have sex.